Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And we hope all you little pumpkins had a great Halloween this week.
I'm sure all of you, just like us, were thrilled to see Sussex Royals' Instagram post marking the occasion of Halloween. We got a picture of Harry and Meghan back when they were on their tour of New Zealand, visiting a special effects workshop. Very, very spooky.
Ooh.
And even a little quote in the caption from their Royal Highnesses was signed. Wishing you all a safe and fun Halloween from our family and our little pumpkin to yours.
Very cute.
This was such an enthusiastic caption. It had 3 exclamation marks. It had 2 emojis. We had the little spooky ghost and the pumpkin, or the jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah, you could tell Meghan had a lot of input, mainly because there weren't any spelling mistakes.
But it also made me so excited for Thanksgiving, because now we know that Meghan is definitely planning something.
Yeah.
And maybe it's even a glimpse of our little pilgrim Archie. Harry was in Japan this weekend watching a rugby match at which England were playing South Africa and England were hammered. Me speaking about sports. Afterwards, Harry went into the men's locker room to meet some of the South Africa players, and there was video of all of them wanting to get pictures with Harry, and he was posing for a lot of photos. And then one guy came over and was like, "Can we do a selfie?" And Harry puts his hand out and he's like, "I can't do a selfie, but we can take a normal picture." It was so funny. I was like, we have seen them in selfies before, but I guess they're cracking down.
Yeah, no selfies in the locker room.
While Harry was in Japan, we learned that Meghan and Archie were watching this rugby match from home, and they even had Archie in a little England baby grow.
He has so many themed baby grows.
But we learned about Meghan and Archie's plans because we got an interview with Meghan in The Telegraph this week. She spoke to the journalist Bryony Gordon, who you may know because she's the same journalist that Harry spoke to back in 2017 on her podcast for The Telegraph about his struggles with mental health. And she does a lot of work in this area. She writes about it a lot, and she's actually one of the accounts that Sussex Royal followed whatever month it was they were focusing on mental health. So they seem to have a good bit of a relationship. And she even describes in the piece first meeting Meghan 18 months ago, and I just love this whole encounter. It makes me so terribly envious. She describes them going for lunch together at a restaurant in London, and they sat in a corner where Meghan was unnoticed and undisturbed. And she says Meghan ate monkfish. And at first I was like, oh, who cares what she ate? That's such a typical women's interview kind of cliche. But then Bryony reveals that Meghan offered her some when she expressed food envy. Can you imagine sharing? I don't even like monkfish, but I would share it with Meghan if she offered me some.
Monkfish is the steak of the sea, Maeve. It's perfect foodie material, I think. Classic Meghan.
Also classic Meghan was that they discussed their shared passions of mental health, running and yoga. And Bryony said it was no different to many of the lunches that she has with girlfriends.
Of course.
Yeah.
Can you imagine lunch with Meghan being anything other than a delight?
So this feature was about the opening of Luminary Bakery's second location in Camden. So you might remember Luminary Bakery as the grassroots organisation that trains women and gives employment to women who have suffered domestic abuse and homelessness and drug abuse and other difficulties in their lives. And they have a location out in Stoke Newington that Meghan wrote about in her September issue of British Vogue. We went there back after the issue came out and we were totally impressed.
Oh yeah, it was delicious.
Now they've done so well that they are opening the second site in Camden. So Bryony went along with Meghan, who we learned prefers to be called Meghan. She doesn't like being called the Duchess of Sussex, which is good because I don't like calling her that. They spoke to a bunch of the women there.
Meghan was in total workwear, jeans, shirt, ready to literally roll her sleeves up and get stuck in. Got some really great shots of her baking.
Yeah, her decorating the cake so lovingly, so carefully. And then Bryony also gave a lot of details about the conversations that Meghan had with the women. There was one point where one of the women started crying and she was saying sorry for her tears, and Meghan handed her a box of tissues, and Bryony noted that in this room those apologies are not necessary. For Meghan, showing vulnerability is not a weakness. On the contrary, it is one of humanity's greatest strengths.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, a lot of the kind of quotes that got picked up from this weren't actually quotes that Meghan said. It was Bryony's own observations about Meghan. Like, one of my favourite ones was, this visit took place 2 weeks before the ITV documentary came out, and Bryony asks Meghan how she is, and she says Meghan's eyes glistened. And then, this is all just Bryony's own take on it. She said, if I have learned anything about Meghan in the time I've known her, it is that she is a doer, not a wallower. She lives in the solution, not the problem. She told me that she didn't want people to love her. She just wanted them to be able to hear her.
I sort of run out of vocabulary around this because I just think it's such a nice event. It's for such an incredible cause. It has cake. It has Meghan just being this light on everybody's life.
Yeah, and she kind of acknowledges that a lot of the language that Meghan uses is stuff that people in Britain are traditionally pretty uncomfortable with, but that it doesn't matter because she's not trying to please her critics. She's trying to give a voice to people who are less privileged than her and to use her position for good. I loved how the piece ended. A woman named Halimut says, I'm a child of nobody and you are a somebody. It means so much that I can meet you. And Meghan smiles at the woman and says, oh no. She beams widely and takes the woman in her arms. It means so much that I can meet you.
There's no way of doing that justice.
One of the quotes Meghan actually does give Bryony is where she says, I find that when you strip all the layers away as people, and especially as women, we can find deep connection with each other and a shared understanding.
And we got a really good moment of connection from another courtier this week. Holly Lynch, who's a Labour MP for Halifax, shared an open letter that was signed by 72 women MPs expressing support for Meghan in her ongoing legal action against the press. This was like a cross-party letter, so it was very much about uniting women from very different kind of political backgrounds around an issue that clearly they feel very strongly about.
Yeah, so they said that they were sending it after hearing Meghan's comments on the ITV documentary, and that they wanted to express their solidarity with Meghan in taking a stand against the often distasteful and misleading nature of the stories printed in a number of our national newspapers concerning you, your character and your family. The stories can only be described as having outdated colonial undertones.
It's a very interesting use of word colonial. We've seen quite a lot of the discussion around this avoiding the word racist.
Yeah.
So we get colonial undertones, we get xenophobic is used a lot, which I get because, you know, it does take into account the fact that maybe it's the Americanness that people find
that's a part of it
uncomfortable,
too.
which it is, you know.
There were a couple of tweets I thought were really good in response to this. Like, one of them was the journalist Paul Akpan, who tweeted, colonial undertones is a novel way of making racism sound like a Cabernet Sauvignon, which was very good. And then there was another one from Kaleshi Okafor, who's an actress and dancer, and she wrote that the female MPs gathering together to write a letter of solidarity because of the colonialist undertones of the media reporting on Meghan clearly overlooked the colonial overtone of the monarchy, which is so true.
Yeah.
And like a little bit cringe, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it's clearly because as soon as you use the word racist, it's like a red rag to the press. You can't accuse us of being like, it's the classic thing that goes on where, like, when you call someone out on being racist, they get more offended than anyone.
Yeah, but that's what makes it more powerful.
Yeah.
And for them to shy away from it in that way is a little bit disappointing to me.
Yeah.
But it was still a nice gesture, and she was obviously impressed because Meghan even called up Holly Lynch, which is no surprise because we know Meghan loves to send thank you notes in her beautiful calligraphy, but in this case she needed something a little bit more. Holly Lynch gave an interview to Omid Scobie at Harper's Bazaar, And she said, "We spoke about how being a woman in the public eye, it can sometimes feel like a lonely place to be. But there's actually a lot of us that feel this way. And when we work together, we can be a real force for good, bringing about the changes that we want to see."
Forces for change. Indeed.
But even these comments were twisted and taken out of context then, which is so frustrating. But Holly Lynch was having none of it, because there was a story on Mail Online which began with the headline, "Labour MP Holly Lynch reveals Meghan Markle admitted being in a lonely place," which is not what Meghan said.
Yeah.
Holly Lynch called them out on Twitter and said, "This is exactly the sort of nonsense we're talking about. We're not having it. Please change your headline." And they did.
So Holly Lynch's support was pretty unequivocal. Somebody else who might be a little more on the fence, Kate Middleton.
I know, we've got a lot of conflicting reports about whether Kate has been an ally to Meghan. I mean, obviously, we're never going to get any concrete evidence about this kind of stuff, but let's just run through some of the things that have been reported. So first off, we had Phil Dampier, who's a royal expert, talking to The Express, and he said, "Behind the scenes, I'm told Kate is doing her best to bring everyone together and help Meghan. None of them want to let the Queen down, so Kate is trying to patch things up in private. I'm told she's reached out to Meghan and spoken to her on the phone. Kate feels sorry for her and knows that Meghan is struggling." I mean, everybody feels sorry for Meghan, but the way that he's expressing it makes it sound like she's pitying her. It just struck me as a little bit condescending.
It's one thing for us to feel sorry for Meghan, because, you know, us putting something out into the world saying we support Meghan is going to go virtually unnoticed. But if Kate really felt strongly about it, she could do something. She could say something. She could go somewhere.
She could wear a piece from the Smart Set collection.
Yeah, exactly. She could actually do something that would really help Meghan.
Grazia magazine had a similar line. They had a royal source saying, "Despite the common assumption they aren't close, Kate has in fact been proactive in keeping up good relations with Meghan, and they have spoken several times in the past month and in the last week."
Being proactive in keeping up good relations is sort of a minimum requirement of being in someone's family. Good relations is quite cold, I think. That's a phrase.
It's pretty mild. But then on the other hand, we had the American magazines reporting a slightly different angle. In Touch magazine had a royal insider again saying that Kate feels sorry for Meghan. She has a good heart and isn't the kind of person to say you've brought it upon yourself. She hasn't brought it upon herself, but anyway. The source continues, "For the most part, Kate's keeping herself out of the situation. Kate has enough on her plate looking after 3 kids and fulfilling royal duties. She barely has a moment to herself and tries to avoid drama and conflict at all costs."
Which again, like, frames it like Meghan's another one of her kids that needs looking after. Like, I definitely believe that Kate doesn't like drama.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure Harry and Meghan would love to stay out of the drama, but they don't really have a choice. And we've got someone else as well who would love to stay out of drama.
And that is Prince Charles.
Yeah, there was a good story this week about how, you might remember back in April, Netflix launched their David Attenborough documentary, Our Planet, and Harry and Will and Charles were all there. But apparently, Charles had his royal aides make clear that he wouldn't be attending the event if Netflix had any actors from The Crown present.
Which is very insecure, right?
I know, and then it just makes it worse that they had another royal source speaking to The Sun saying Charles's staff are deeply paranoid about the Crown. They're trying to make him a popular king in waiting, but the next few seasons are going to be increasingly focused on the Prince of Wales' behaviour, especially around his marriage to Diana and affair with Camilla. The timing couldn't be any more disastrous in terms of Charles's bid for popularity.
You could do so much more for his popularity if you had a picture of him, like, shaking hands with, what's his name? The guy who's
Josh O'Connor.
With Josh O'Connor, yeah. Imagine that.
People would love it.
They would.
Nobody expects The Crown to be a documentary, but I think people like to see the royals being a good sport about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to distance yourself gives a lot more credence to what they're going to put in the show. It's like, that's why you're scared of something. Is you're scared of something if it's too close to the truth.
I know, and especially because The Crown has actually made the royals so much more popular all over the world.
Absolutely.
So they kind of owe them.
But we did get more of Charles on TV this week because we had the second part of his Inside the Duchy documentary. This one focused a lot more on Will taking over, which I think is going to possibly be a disaster.
Yeah, and we saw Will kind of talking to some of the tenants and meeting the farmers and trying to learn more about what goes on the farmland. And honestly, he just struck me as being completely out of his depth. Like, he seemed very uncomfortable talking to people and wasn't having natural conversations with them at all. And like, we'd never think of Charles as being particularly easy talking to normal people, but he looked totally at ease in comparison and looked genuinely interested in people, whereas Will kind of looked like he was desperate to be anywhere else.
Yeah, and it was always kind of like he was trailing in the conversation, like he was just kind of half-heartedly agreeing with what anybody else said.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sort of saying half sentences and then stopping.
I have to say, it was very unflattering for him.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, apart from the moment that we have like all these shots of him in profile, and then suddenly it goes to front on with Will, and we realise he's got like 2 buttons undone and his chest hair is right there on display.
That's really awesome.
I know, and there's almost like a wind machine effect where the collar is being blown open to give you a real blast of the chest hair.
But honestly, it doesn't work, because we also get, in part 1 as well as a little bit in part 2, you get these shots of young Charles, which we mentioned before, which are just so much cooler. I love him. I'm a real Charlie's Angel.
Yeah, definitely.
I did love, however, learning about how much George is excited to inherit the duchy someday because he loves tractors. In fact, Will goes so far as to say,
I should have brought George today. He'd be absolutely loving this. Yes, he's obsessed.
Obsessed.
Which I think is very dangerous, because he should be looking for more sustainable ways of farming, like Charles, who uses horses. But probably the biggest event this week, for us anyway, was the release of The Other Side of the Coin, which is a new book by Angela Kelly, who's the Queen's dresser. She's worked with her for 25 years, so this is a really intimate portrait of a working relationship with the Queen.
Yeah, and it's kind of been billed as her secrets, but I mean, to some extent, certainly. But she makes it clear right from the beginning that the Queen is on board with all of this. We've got at least 3 or maybe 4 references to the Queen allowing her to write about this, giving her permission and her blessing. She says the Queen was with me every step of the way.
She talks about how she does it in the form of a slight apology, where she's like, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, for running back and forward, checking things with you on the stories and getting you to read them over and over again.
But I guess that makes the things that she does include and doesn't include all the more interesting. Like, for instance, she talks about in 2009 when Michelle Obama came to meet the Queen and famously put her arm around her, and people freaked out that it was a breach of royal protocol. And like, we've heard Michelle Obama talk about that as well, and it was like not a big deal. But this is the way for the Queen to let everybody know that she didn't have any problem with it, because she has Angela included in the book that she thought it was a natural instinct for the Queen to show affection and respect for another great woman, and really there's no protocol that must be adhered to, which is the kind of story that has nothing to do with dressing the Queen, but Angela still included it.
Yeah.
We don't know why. She, however, didn't include anything about the brooches, when people thought that the Queen had worn a brooch given to her by the Obamas when she was meeting Trump for the first time. We got no details on that.
No. We did get some details on another controversial piece of clothing, though, or more of an accessory, I suppose. It was the famous EU hat from 2017, which the Queen wore to open Parliament that year. It was a blue hat with yellow star-like flowers.
But it was crazy because this is one of the only times where the Queen hasn't worn the full ceremonial garb for the Parliament opening. So clearly there would have been a huge amount of focus on what she was going to wear instead, because this is a historical event, all this stuff. But Angela denies that there was any intention to recall the EU flag. She says it was a coincidence, but boy, did it attract a lot of attention, and it certainly made us smile. Now, I don't know if I believe that.
No, I mean, one of the great things about this book is you see how good she is at her job, how much thought goes into everything, the number of people who are kind of involved in terms of her team. The idea that nobody picked this up along the whole process is really unlikely, I think.
Yeah. she described their first encounter and how at the time she was working as a housekeeper for the British ambassador to Germany, and the Queen and Prince Philip came to stay, and when they were leaving...
Oh, they asked her who was coming to stay next, and she couldn't tell them because she had signed the Official Secrets Act. So she said, I'm sorry, it's confidential. And Philip was like, I think you can tell the Queen. And she was like, I think I can't tell the Queen because I've signed the Official Secrets Act.
But the Queen was so impressed by her discretion that a few months later, when they'd gone back, Angela got a phone call from the palace saying that the Queen was wondering if she'd be interested in applying for a job there. And obviously she got it.
We get a lot of great details about Angela herself, that she didn't consider herself to be the kind of typical person who would go and work at Buckingham Palace. She talks about her interview for the job where she sold her washing machine in order to buy a new outfit for it that she thought would be appropriate.
It was like long skirt that you can barely walk in because she thought it needed to be very modest.
And then as she went to work there, other courtiers were very, inquisitive or kind of looked down on her for being divorced. And also she was something she'd worried about before at the ambassador's residence as well, but she wanted elocution lessons. She's from Liverpool and she was worried that her Scouse accent was not appropriate for the setting. But we get a great kind of story that the Queen was like, that's absolutely ridiculous, and said she didn't need them. And in fact, she gave her one single elocution lesson herself. The Queen said that rather than saying furious, you should say furious.
Well done, Tom.
Thanks. You're practicing.
I really thought, though, because the Queen was so on board with all of this, that it would be a very dry, very dull, very slavish kind of read. But it was actually not at all. It was very funny, like consistently very, very interesting, like such a compelling read, like you'd read it all in one go, and beautiful pictures. And it also gives a very nice insight into the relationship between the Queen and Angela and the sort of lighter side of the Queen.
Oh yeah, you get a whole chapter on how the Queen likes pranks.
That's a great chapter, which she rightfully saves to the very end.
Yeah.
One of my favourites was that she was attending a costume party in the palace and they didn't have time to change between dressing the Queen and getting into costume. So she had to dress the Queen while in her costume as Cheryl Cole.
And the person assisting her was dressed as Queen Victoria. And then
So
she
funny.
heard the Queen saying something like, I've just been dressed by Queen Victoria. And I believe Cheryl Cole. Who she had to
Definitely
explain.
learned who that is for the first time that evening.
I thought to myself some time ago, who's Cheryl Tweedy? And I suddenly realised that I knew the Cheryl bit. I had missed out on the Tweedy.
There was another really good one where they were in Thailand, the Queen and Angela Angela pretended like she had a problem with some hair dye and it turned her hair purple. The detail I love about this is that she'd picked up a purple hairpiece from Accessorize before they'd left, so she'd planned this well in advance.
Well, she knew she wasn't going to get her roots done, so she saw the pranking potential and she ran with it. But it also gives a really good look at how much actually goes into Angela's job and how complex it is. Like, in some cases, the Queen is changing outfits up to 7 times a day, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Angela herself actually has a lot of problem solving and decision making and stuff to do. Like, one of the stories I really liked was that they were in kind of a rush ahead of the Commonwealth Games at Kuala Lumpur in 1998, and she had ordered a hat for the Queen to match this outfit that they had made. But when the hat arrived, she hadn't had a chance to look at it beforehand, and she realised when they were there, oh my god, this hat is not going to work. It had this sort of shell-like brim on the front.
Flat cap.
Eventually, she realised the solution was for the Queen to wear the hat backwards, and it looked smashing.
Oh yeah. She even notes that the press really praised the hat and the outfit in general.
Yeah.
So it's so satisfying to read because she's so good at her job.
There's so much good detail, like, on how they recreated the replica of the christening gown and how they got it to be the right colour. They stained it using Yorkshire tea bags, and they had to make it slightly bigger because babies now are bigger now than they were back then. And she goes into all the details of how she puts the cape on the Queen for, like, say, the ropes that she wears to the state opening of Parliament, that you have to use chairs to hold the weight of the robe so that it doesn't pull the Queen backwards when they put it on her because it's so heavy, and all that kind of stuff. I really liked one detail where she was describing cleaning the diadem and how she uses gin, water and a bit of washing up liquid to make it sparkling again, which I thought was a nice little life hack for those of us cleaning our diadems. But of course, there are lots of very flattering details about the Queen. One of the most notable ones to me was when Angela says the Queen had and still has excellent legs.
I knew that.
But also that apparently the Queen, other than for the Christmas message, the Queen always does her own makeup.
Which is an astounding detail. Like, I wouldn't have thought she had the time. There was another really good detail that Angela breaks in the Queen's shoes.
Very convenient, they're the same size.
Yeah.
There's some comedy moments. A lot of comedy moments. One of my favourites is when they have a jeweller in. At first, he's like very vague and he won't talk about how much it's going to cost. And the Queen's like, don't ask me, Angela has the money, which is so funny.
The Queen wants to design a special piece of jewellery for her mother's birthday. And Mr. Collins, the jeweller, says, oh, I've been working on that design for your mum. And Angela tells him later, you probably shouldn't refer to the Queen's mother as her mum. And he goes away and reads a whole book on etiquette and comes back in. I don't know if you watch Downton, but it's very Molesley.
Oh my god, it's totally Molesley. Like, he's so preoccupied with the etiquette that one of the apparent things you're apparently never meant to do is turn your back to the Queen. So when he's leaving the room, he starts walking out backwards, but he doesn't realise there's a corgi behind him and he trips over the dog. I thought one of the kind of revealing details was that the Queen had always wanted to have a picture that was sort of more casual, and specifically that she could have her hands in her pockets. Such a funny thing to always want to have, and kind of sad, honestly.
Yeah.
So she said it to Angela, and Angela was like, I can do this. So they picked a dress, and Angela had to add pockets to the dress, and then she got this photographer, Barry Jeffrey, to come in and take the pictures, and he started to give instructions, and they were like, no, just keep the camera rolling. And then she says the Queen started to mimic the stances of a professional model.
The photos are great. She's looking off into the distance, she's sticking out her hips, shoulders.
Yeah, like we'd seen some of the pictures before, but they wouldn't allow the release of the full set because apparently courtiers thought that the candid photographs would bring the monarchy down, which is just one of the most outrageous things to say ever. And Lainey Gossip pointed out that it was on the New Zealand tour, actually when Harry and Meghan were visiting that special effects workshop, Meghan was wearing a blazer dress with pockets and she had her hands in the pockets, and they had one of the tabloids, I think it was the Mail, had an etiquette expert in to say no royal should ever post their hands in their pockets.
The Queen and Meghan are more alike than we ever thought.
And I also really liked when she gave the details about the visit to Ireland, when the Queen came to Ireland, and she famously wore this dress with like thousands of shamrocks embroidered on it. She also had a Swarovski crystal harp embedded in the shoulder of the dress, and that they were very careful because they didn't want it to look like the Guinness logo. So they had to make sure it was the right side of the harp, which I thought was so good.
There was a really good other Guinness related moment as well. So Angela is blonde, but at one point she decided to dye the bottom half of her hair dark because it was the fashion at the time. And when the Queen saw her, she just said, "Have you ever seen a pint of Guinness?"
So good. Fantastic quote. But what about your quote of the week, Tom? Who's it going to be?
This week I'm going to go with Meghan at the Luminary Bakery event. She said, "We get into this habit of wanting things done immediately nowadays. There's a culture of instant gratification, of the instant fix. But we aren't mechanical objects that need to be fixed. You're a wounded creature that needs to be healed, and that takes time. And that's what I love about this place. It gives you the support to heal.
Just classic Meghan, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really good. We've decided to do something a little different for Fit for a Queen this week, though.
Given we have been rifling through the pictures in Angela Kelly's book, and also we've been having a look through Sally Hughes's book, Our Rainbow Queen, we thought we would look back on some of our favourite outfits of the queens.
Yeah.
So, who is your Fit for a Queen look this week?
My Fit for a Queen is 2008's Visiting Slovakia Queen.
Snow Queen.
Snow Queen.
Cold never bothered me anyway.
She's dressed in this off-white tweed outfit, so it's a coat with matching dress, and the hat is also in the same fabric, and it's got a mink fur trim, which has now been replaced with fake fur. That was an interesting detail from the book, that they're kind of updating a lot of the outfits that have fur to use fake fur, which is great. But this outfit I chose because I haven't really seen the Queen wear anything like it. She finished the outfit off with these black boots, and honestly, I couldn't see the top of these boots, so they could be thigh high for all we know.
And Angela was very proud of them because she got great press over this because people hadn't seen the Queen in boots like this before.
She looks so tall. I've never ever seen a picture of the Queen where I thought, oh, she looks tall.
Yeah, we'll post the pictures on Instagram at AirheadsPod if you want to check them out. I have a few, okay? My Fit for a Queens. First up, I loved in Sally Hughes's book the section on prints and all the Queen's prints. So one of the ones I really liked was that she wore this Prince of Wales check, and she didn't just have it in the coat. She had it in the coat and the dress. This very graphic print, black and white. She then had a white bag, white hat, white gloves, and white shoes. It was so striking. I thought she looked incredible. This was when she was visiting Turkey in 1971. And it reminded me a little bit of something Kate might wear, although Kate would, have it with like very muted accessories. She wouldn't go for this brilliant white, but I loved it. And
the white hat is so good. It's like a cowboy hat.
Also loved another printed dress. She wore this green floral dress when she was on tour in New Zealand for her Silver Jubilee tour in 1977. Honestly, I think the 70s were my favourite period for the Queen, especially when she was travelling. Her tour wardrobes were sensational. This dress was a green and white floral dress with a tie at the neck, long 3/4 length sleeves with sort of full skirt. Gorgeous print, so bright, so vibrant, with matching hat, and then we had the white gloves, the white bag, and the white shoes again. Looked fab. Another white glove outfit that I loved, very Mickey Mouse, was also on that tour. She wore this blue dress with a sort of crisscross pattern all along the décolletage.
You love the Queen's décolletage. And I think when we look back over so many great outfits, our first in line becomes quite obvious.
I know, we're actually going outside of the family this time because we had to hand it to Angela Kelly. She did a phenomenal job.
She's an honorary member of the family this week. Just loved reading that book so much. It gave such a great insight into the Queen in a way we didn't expect, and, hats off to Angela because she came across so well.
Yeah, and she also gave us a lot of details about what it's like working with the other courtiers in the house, and she says it's changed, but I think it does give you a glimpse into what it's actually like in there and what, say, Meghan and Harry are dealing with at the moment. Like, she talks about how when she started working there, she was told that only after 12 years as a staff member would she be allowed an opinion. So she had to show them that she wouldn't be silenced, and she tells this fantastic story about when the Queen was visiting the Vatican in 2000, and she wasn't officially dressing the Queen at that point, so she wasn't in the room for those conversations about what the Queen was going to wear, and the senior courtiers were saying she just needs a day dress. Angela, who is Catholic, said, no way, that's not going to work. She's going to need something a lot smarter, something more formal for meeting the Pope. So even though people refused to listen to her, she went and behind everyone's back had secretly made up 2 outfits for the Queen in navy and black and had the invoices sent directly to her so nobody would find out about them. On the day that the Queen is meant to be going to the Vatican and meeting the Pope, Angela describes the courtiers running frantically through the hotel.
Yeah, and not even wearing shoes.
They are so panicked, they don't even have their shoes on.
They're wearing like 1,000 shades of brown corduroy. It's kind of bizarre.
They're like panting, like losing their minds, being like, oh my God, Angela, do you have anything? This actually isn't going to work. It's a much more formal tradition. We've got to have something else. And she gets to smugly pluck out not 1 but 2 options for the Queen, and the Queen is thrilled and it goes off without hitch.
It's not only the courtiers, though, that she kind of has run-ins with. She also has problems with couturiers.
This is a really good bit. She describes this as her pretty woman moment, where she is going to look for a designer who can make clothes for the Queen. She gets advice to go to this particular area where there are a number of designers, and she wants to go to a British designer, so she walks into the first one and she observes that the items in the window looked quite stale, but that she still wanted to give them a chance. So she asks to see some of their pieces and she's looking around, and then the guy, the owner, one of the designers, like gives her this sort of icy glare and is like, this is couture, not retail.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
So, what have we got coming up next week?
Well, we'll have to see what Angela Kelly creates for the Queen for Remembrance Day, which is coming up this week. We're lucky to see a few engagements around it, but I guess the big one that everyone's talking about is the service on Sunday, at which the Cambridges and the Sussexes will come face to face for their first reunion since the ITV documentary that Harry and Meghan did.
Yeah, that is going to be... I bet we're going to get Judy James doing
some... Oh, Judy James has cleared her books for that day. She's ready to talk to anyone that'll listen.
Yeah, I mean, she's probably written it already. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review us wherever you find your podcasts.
You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at AirheadsPod and on Facebook at Airheads.
And we hope you have a great week.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
That's really awesome.